Welcome to Cash Plays. And now your host, Bart Hanson.
Welcome everyone to another week of Cash Plays. I am Bart Hanson. This week's episode, a conversation with Daniel Negreanu. And the World Series of Poker has concluded for me. I am heading back to Los Angeles. Recorded this interview with Daniel a few days ago. And because of the length, I am going to get right to it. It's not the most heavily strategic cash game interview that I've ever had, but definitely a good one. You know, Daniel gives great interviews, and we talk a little bit about poker business, lifestyle issues, a little bit of strategy. I think that one of the biggest things that you can come away with is kind of his approach mentally to poker and, you know, some bankroll management, some very, very interesting things. You know, he goes against some people who are pretty well established in the poker community and their thoughts on, you know, how you should play and how much money you should have for each game. You know, he is kind of from the old guard pre-poker boom, but he used to always play on a short roll. So it's a very, very interesting interview. And again, we will be back with normal shows next week. So without further ado, we are going to go to commercial, and we will be back with Daniel Negreanu right here on Cash Plays.
Cash Plays.
Previously on Poker Road Radio.
All right, hang on. Varconi's telling me that we got the details wrong over here. What happened, Rob?
Chainsaw, get on the mic. Let's go. Come on.
Why are you calling Chainsaw Marco?
Oh, you know what?
At first I thought you were joking. I thought you were joking.
I thought you were joking, too.
Now it turns out that you're just a super dog, and you called Chainsaw Robert Varconi.
I absolutely love that I just did that for the second time today, actually.
Robert Varconi.
Come on, talk
AKA
about the hand.
Chainsaw,
Talk about the hand, Alan.
a.k.a. Alan
Talk
Kessler.
about the hand.
What up?
Don't miss a moment. Tune in to Poker Road Radio and get all the action from the tournament circuit.
Cash Plays.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Cash Plays, a conversation with Daniel Negreanu. And, you know, the beauty of doing this show, Cash Plays, with this portable Marantz solid-state recorder is I get to check out everybody's house. I was over at Townsend's house. Now I'm here at your house over in Summerlin. I'm quite impressed.
Well, you know what? Just for those that are listening, if you hear any really bizarre licking sounds, that's just my dog. And nothing's going on between me and Bart.
No.
Despite what, you know, some of them forums might think.
Like I kind of had the same similar situation with Townsend's dog too. But your dog is a pretty cute little thing. What kind of dog is it?
Little Chihuahua. He's a killer though. He'll rip your head off if you mess with me.
Little Chihuahua. Of course, this is Cash Plays, so you know we like to talk about cash games here, Daniel. But I think that it's pretty topical since you and I both played in the main event and with your site, Poker VT, to talk a little bit about Poker VT and to talk a little bit about the strategy as a deep stack no limit cash game player. What is the difference in a strategy between, say, playing 150 to 200 big blinds in a cash game versus playing in a tournament just as deep?
Well, it really depends on the tournament. And since you brought up the main event, I wanted to be a little more specific with that one since it's probably a little more fresh also. It's the one event where I come with a completely different strategy than I would with most, simply because the caliber of play in that event is by a gazillion 0.3% worse than any other tournament you'll find. It's just such a low level of play that the small ball approach, the basically playing tons and tons and tons of pots, tons of small pots is absolutely the way to go to chip up, to really try to avoid, you know, playing any, you know, big pots unless you have the nuts, because, you know, when you set up an approach like that, you're playing a lot of hands, you're confusing people. Whenever you put in big chips, you're usually going to have them crushed. Of course, you know, you might flop a set and lose to a bigger set. That happens to people sometimes. But if that doesn't happen, you know, it's really, really, I don't even think it's that hard to win that tournament. Yeah, there's a lot of players, but even though I haven't won it, it doesn't seem that hard. It seems pretty easy, to tell you the truth.
You know, it's an interesting spot, too, because I wonder where I got knocked out in the tournament. I was in the third level right before dinner, and I got down to 9,000 or 10,000, and I almost felt like I was panicking a little bit. But then after I got knocked out, I was like, why the hell was I panicking? I still have a bunch of chips. And I played for stacks I had flopped top two on a 7-6-5 board with two hearts. Now, I've talked to a couple people about that. Do you think that that's a little bit reckless, that I could have kind of waited for a safe turn card to increase my equity?
That totally is dependent upon how the hand played out. If it was a hand where you raise before the flop and the guy re-raises you,
right.
Well, then you're obviously not going to be afraid of that.
Right.
Actually, in my hand, the situation where I went broke was similar in a sense that I raised with 2 6s, the minimum, as I do when there's no ante, and a relatively bad player re-raised me to 600. And it looked to me like he had something. And it comes 6, 8, 9 with 2 spades. And I check, and he bets really big. And he's the type that overbets everything.
Overbets a big pocket
doesn't
player.
really understand.
Right.
So he bets 1,500. I make it 45. He says all in. I say call quickly. And he has 3 9s. So, difficult to put him on a hand in that spot. In your situation, it's really dependent upon, was it a limp pot? Was it very possible that the other player had 8, 9, or even a
right.
set? And again, my situation wasn't that wasn't the case at all. I'm never folding 3 6s there
in that spot. Now, let's talk a little bit about poker VT, because I've had quite extensive talks with all of the training sites here at the World Series, and when I asked them about what they thought about poker VT, and I want to see if they're totally off the wall. They were like, well, yeah, what Daniel's trying to do, he's trying to market it to kind of the amateur player, something that you could give somebody as a gift. But when I was doing research today before I came over here, I watched a lot of your demo videos, and you were saying, well, this is really a site for the amateur and for the pro. So who are you looking to target here?
Everybody. I mean, I was speaking to Phil Galfond the other day, and he mentioned to me that he's a member of all the sites. Mm-hmm. He says one of the reasons he does that is he gets a feel for how people think and how they play, and he says it's well worth the low cost.
Right.
Now, I'm not necessarily a proponent of saying that, but what I will say is that the Poker VT has something to offer for every type of poker player. Whether it's a complete novice who's never played ever before, there's a whole section for beginners that's going to get them, give them a betting system, if you will, that's going to make them at least competent. Some loosely discussed starting hand requirements, things like that. But then there's some really deep stuff in there. We cut up hands. We do a lot of hand analysis, like live footage of hands that we just shot a regular cash game, where people play, and then I'll look at the hand, cut it up. We'll do like sort of the John Madden-like thing where we stop and go, explain where the big mistakes occurred and how that compounded it. And I'll tell you what, the reviews. If you really look at the reviews of those that have signed up to Poker VT, I'm very confident saying that like the high majority feel like they've got way more than their money's worth, and they feel like the site is top notch in every way, not just aesthetically pleasing, but the content is just there's tons of it.
Well, now that you've thrown your hat into the video training arena, and obviously you've been around poker way before the boom, and I remember you telling stories about how back when you were playing, you were playing on a short $20,000 or $30,000 roll, and a 200, 400 mix game didn't have the ability to play 10 tables of 30, 60 online like some kid does now. But now that all these video training sites are coming around, and I asked the same question to the other guys that were with the other companies, what do you think about the beatability for a guy trying to make his way up through the mid stakes? And if he says, I want to be a professional poker player, I mean, is it tougher than it ever has before? And obviously there's more resources out there.
Oh, it's funny that you said I played 2 and 400 with a $20,000, $30,000 bankroll, because it was more like 3,000 or 4,000.
Okay, yeah.
You're giving me way too much credit, buddy. Yeah, 20 or 30,000, I'd be playing 1,500, 3,000 easy. But no, here's the thing: when it comes to poker and the education of the game, we can go way back to Doyle Brunson when he first wrote Super System, and everyone's saying, Doyle, you're being such an idiot. Why are you teaching everyone how to play this game? Why are you opening up the book and explaining how to play it, right? And if you look historically at that decision, he was mocked for, and he was, sort of chastised, if you will, a little bit. But it did a great service for poker because it got more people into the game, more people learning the game. The poker sites are going to help players get better. No question about that. But not everyone's going to sign up for them. And there's enough poker players worldwide, internationally, that it's usually an ego thing. They're like, I can play this game. They jump in. They don't understand the fundamentals. They don't really care to learn, especially from some young pipsqueaks, if you will. They're not going to feel comfortable with the idea of like, yeah, I'm going to learn from some kid who's 19, So there's always going to be a lot of players that just simply don't get it. Even if a training site can only do so much for a player. If you can only give them sort of a guideline as to how to play. But if they're really not intelligent enough or don't understand how to apply it properly, they're not going to be able to be, just really big winning players.
Well, do you think it's now possible for a guy who's solely a self-taught player to be one of the top players, or are they really missing out if they're not, say, signed up for these trainings?
I'll be honest with you. I think it would speed up the learning curve for any player. But I don't think that, you have to go to a training site to become a great player. Mm-hmm. All it's going to do is, let's say if, you're like a young kid who's 21 and just learning the ropes and, you're learning these new moves and these new things. These are all things you'll get to eventually if you are talented and if you are the next, big thing in poker. But just by going to the training sites, you'll be exposed to these kinds of plays and this kind of thinking without having to, sort of randomly throw darts at a dartboard and hope that you hit.
Well, let's bring into, something that I think that the training sites and probably specifically card runners changed the nature of the 6 max no limit game online, which is obviously it's a shorthanded no limit game. But if you played in the games 2 or 3 years ago, there was very, very little 3-betting pre-flop. Now with 100 big blind stacks, it's almost like the game plays between like a hybrid limit and no limit, where it's just constant pressure. What do you think about that style, 3-betting with a very, very wide range and just putting constant pressure on guys in cash games?
Well, I think it really makes sense, especially because of what's considered to be optimal play. And I've had this conversation with Phil Ivey a little bit because a lot of the online players think that they could beat Phil Ivey. They don't. He beats them, but he beats them in an unconventional way because he does things that they would see as quote-unquote negative EV. For example, calling raises out of position with some marginal hands. He's willing to do that because he wants to widen his range. So what's happening online, of course, is you're seeing a lot more re-raising before the flop, a lot more defining of the hands before the flop, a lot more pressure being put on, as you said. One of the other key reasons that actually makes sense is because you don't have the presence of physical tells. And you can't get as good of a read on your opponent's mental state and things like that. So it's a little easier to do that sort of thing when you're playing online because, or not that it's easier, it just probably makes a little more sense in that you want to be able to, instead of picking up a physical tell, pick up a tell based on their betting patterns. And by defining your own hand, it's easier to define theirs.
Now, I remember a few months back, actually, the first time that I interviewed you over on Poker Road Radio, you had kind of, and this might have been 8 to 10 months ago, you had started, I think you were hosting or you were starting to introduce 25-50 no-limit ring games on Stars. Is that right? Or you were starting to, I remember you made a post and you were like, I'm trying to start to get this game going on Stars as a regular game. 25-50 no-limit.
Oh, those games go all the time.
Well, I mean, when you
I was playing in them.
Yeah, maybe it was just that you said you were going to play.
I wasn't starting them. Those things are going.
No, right. But
when I sit down, they start. Yeah.
When you sit down, they start. Now, what do you think about, say, now some of these sites are introducing 200 big bet no-limit tables. And when you see these internet kids come live and they're playing in a deeper stack format, I assume that you think that the live players have a bigger advantage when they're playing the later streets, because in those 100 big bet tables, all the money seems like it's in pre-flop and on-flop.
But
right?
I'll be honest with you, I don't think the key reason is the fact that they're playing deeper stacked. Because I tell you the truth, I think a lot of the online players play deeper stack really well. They don't make a lot of big mistakes. They don't trap themselves too often, and they're capable of making big bluffs. I'd say the biggest difference is, and the one aspect of poker that's often mocked or overlooked or just looked at as like, yeah, that's old school stuff. But it's simply the presence of physical tells, the ability to watch someone's reaction to a card and these types of things. And some of the guys who've been playing live for so long, and I use Kenny Tran in most of my examples when I say this, he's really good. Like, you look at your cards, and based on the way that you look at your cards, he has a little bit of an inkling as to what you have. Okay, most players aren't going to get any of that. He's going to see you squeeze your card and think, okay, this guy, I think he just squeezed out 2 7s based on the way he looked at it. Mm-hmm. That's an amazing talent, and that's an amazing amount of information that's just not prevalent live. And I think that online players are obviously more susceptible to giving away a little bit more, and they're less likely to be able to read into other people's physical tells simply because it's not part of their daily routine. Their daily routine, a lot of them specific, more so, are just playing multi-tables. So they're all playing pretty much a robotic style for the most part. You can't play too creatively. And that style's not going to do as well against really creative cash game players who are only playing in one game.
Well, and I think remember there was this debate about how, well, does Kenny Tran, does he use math and poker? And like you might have just said, well, he takes a look and maybe he thinks you squeeze out sevens, but maybe he's putting you on a range of a mid-pocket pair, like 5s to 8s or something like that, right? And then he can go along and play the hand accordingly in that sense.
And, everyone uses math, obviously, but not in the same sense that, people will. Like, Phil Ivey, he laughs kind of at it. He's like, I don't even know. 4-1, 8-20. He's like, I just figured the guy didn't have it. That's it. Like, and Kenny Tran, obviously everyone understands or has a rough idea of the mathematics, but poker being played at its highest levels, everyone has a decent understanding of the fundamentals. Everyone knows the math pretty good enough. So what it really comes down to is the psychology of, mixing it up. What does this guy think I'm going to do now? A little rock, scissors, paper, if you will. What does this guy think and also another key, too, that's overlooked, and Phil Ivey, obviously we talk a lot about poker sometimes, and just the idea that you can make some plays that might be quote-unquote negative EV, if it's only slight, but it's widening your range so much so, that gives you a huge benefit after the flop to give you an opportunity to either bluff, to either get paid off when a player doesn't give you a possible hand like that. So, the idea of there being this one way to play no limit hold'em and certain plays you just can't make. Anytime you think like that, you're limiting your potential to be creative and unreadable.
I want to bring it back to what we were talking about before, because most of the people that listen to this show, they're interested in cash games, but just along like with everybody else, there's a big tournament that comes around that we all like to play in, the main event or whether it's the local WPT event. What do you see as the difference between a guy who regularly beats, say, 10-20 or 20-40 no limit? Say I'm playing 50-100 no limit with $20,000 in cash. What's the difference between when I'm playing right there and when I'm playing in the first round of the main event? The numbers are identical, right?
Well, there's not much difference there. What changes, though, is, for the cash game player, they're basically just looking to play a pretty straightforward style, a pretty conservative style that's just going to get them some money. Mm-hmm. And just every hand, they're looking to just maximize value. Mm-hmm. That's just not the way you approach tournament poker. And, you're not going to see a guy who plays regularly in cash game decide at some point to really kick it into high gear and start pushing guys around to steal lines and antes. Because that's not present. I mean, it's just a different animal. Playing tournaments, there's different times in a tournament where you have to veer from fundamentally sound strategy that you would use in a cash game. Whether it be get really much more aggressive or get really short on chips and know that you have to make a play. Whereas in a cash game, you could just quit. If you get short, you don't just have to go all in with queen 7 under the gun. You could throw it away and just buy more chips.
What do you think, though, fundamentally, in the sense that a guy that's experienced in cash games that, we've been talking a lot about this show about betting favorable board textures heads up. I mean, you think that you can use that, obviously, like in deep stack tournament where you've raised and a guy's called out of a position and now the board comes out, high, low, low, king, 4, deuce, rainbow, where it's very unlikely that the guy can call if you bet and he takes down a king. Stuff like that, or stuff like 2 and 3 barreling, sometimes where you might do it in a cash game. Do you think you need to be a little more conservative in a tournament?
Yeah, the one I'd say, that's pretty similar to the limit hold'em players and both no limit hold'em cash game players. One of their biggest flaws generally in tournaments is they are a little bit too preoccupied with protecting their hand or protecting, basically protecting their hand instead of protecting the pot and protecting themselves from losing all of their chips in a situation they don't need to. The ideal approach to tournament poker is essentially one which you're not even really worried about big pots at all. You just want to win every small one that you play. And if you ever do play a big one, you're always cautious. And if you have the nuts, great. But if you don't, it's always your first train of thought should be, I got to avoid going broke here. I don't go broke in this hand. Unless I have to. If you have to, you have to. Unless a big bluff makes sense. But ideally, you want to play the entire tournament without ever, risking all your chips. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting because there was a guy that used to play on Live at the Bike way back in the day. His name was Jonas. I think he's an instructor on Deuces Cracked RBK. And he used to tell me, at least with no-limit cash games, was people are too mindful of trying to protect their hand against protecting their stack. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's absolutely very similar. There's a lot of situations come up in no limit hold'em, whether it's the flop or the turn, where you're pretty sure you got the best hand. And if it's limit hold'em, you got to bet. There's just no question about it. You got to protect your hand. If you get check raised, no big deal. It's one bet. But in no limit hold'em, often, if you figure a guy might have 2 overcards and that's it, it's not the end of the world to check there. because he's only got a 14% chance with one card to come to outdraw you. But if he check raises you, he might bluff you. He might actually have you beat. So there's nothing wrong often with giving away free cards. And I think that's probably, the theme, I think, with, again, limit hold'em players and sometimes cash game players is that they don't understand in tournaments it's often okay to give away free cards if it means it's going to increase the chances that you're going to keep the pot small and protect your stack.
Like not over-betting some sort of flush draw or something on the flop with your overpair.
Well, right? For example, if you have 2 jacks and the big blind calls you and it comes queen 8-4 and he check calls and the turn's like a 3 and he checks, you don't have to bet the jacks if you think he's got a flush draw. If you're really sure that he's going to throw it away, you can do it, but it's not the end of the world to give the guy the free draw. If the draw hits, you don't have to pay it off anyway. Mm-hmm. And also by checking the turn, you might induce a bluff on the river when the river comes a deuce.
Let's switch gears here and talk a little bit about poker lifestyle issues, because I get so many emails regarding bankroll management. Bart, what's suitable for this game, and so on and so on. But you're a guy that's been there. You made your way. You moved up. I assume you came close to going broke a couple times, right?
Came close, went well by it. Everyone I know did, but it was a different time.
So, but at what point in your life did you hit, was it a certain figure where you felt comfortable with the money? Again, a lot of people, they say, well, if you have this amount of buy-ins, you're okay. But was it for you for a certain point in your life where you were just comfortable and not afraid to, that you weren't living on edge anymore?
No, it was, but it had nothing to do with how much money I had at all. It wasn't related to that at all. It really, to tell you the truth, when the poker boom happened, and I realized that poker was here to stay, and that there was always going to be money coming in for me, whether it's through actually playing or doing other things, whether it's endorsements or poker VT and stuff like that. Just having money coming in, I don't need a lot of money to live on. So if I get, let's just throw a random number, if I get $100,000 a month for whatever I'm doing, that covers my bills, right, handsomely. And I don't really need to do anything else, right. So I would say that once, the poker boom happened and that kind of money started coming in, I realized that, then I wouldn't have to worry. When you play poker for a living, if that's all you do and you're not making any of that other money, there's virtually no amount of money that can be safe, depending on how high you play. Like when I had, say, whatever, in my box, $3 million or $4 million before any of this stuff happened, playing in 2004 in the big game, $3 million can get burned through to 4,000 and 8,000 very quickly. Mm-hmm. So I didn't think about the number of bets. I never really, I never thought in poker terms that way, because back then, if I went broke, I'd just borrow money anyway. Right.
So it had a lot to do with borrowing power amongst peers. And
that's the way
like
the poker world worked before online poker. Uh-huh. Today, if I, let's say I had no endorsement opportunities, I was just a nobody starting out, it's so easy to build a bankroll. It's just too easy. You can start out with $100 and just play like 1 penny, 2 penny, no limit hold'em, and just grind and play like more games, and then just eventually like a month later be playing, a little higher, and you can pay your bills and do all that stuff. Whereas when I started out, we just played one game, 10, 20, limit hold'em, and that was it.
Is there something that you would recommend for a guy like a kid who's 22 who's just kind of trying to make it, that maybe something that you didn't do, like saving a portion of the money that you brought in?
If you're playing poker for a living, I don't really subscribe to the whole idea of like take 10% of your winnings and put it aside. Uh-huh. Take this out, because I'm like, okay, so when you lose the money, what are you going to do? You're going to go use that money anyway. Right. So people would ask me. Actually, it's funny. My ex-wife would ask me. It's like, well, what's your poker bankroll? I'm like, everything we got. What do you think it is? It's like if I lose my poker bankroll, I'm just going to fund it with some other money that I have. So it's all essentially one thing. Now you can play games with it. If you feel more comfortable, like putting a little aside so that you have some for a rainy day, and that's not a bad idea. Mm-hmm. Whatever works for you. I'm certainly not an expert in terms of like teaching people how to maintain a bankroll and be careful to not go broke, because I was a risk taker. All the people around me, Ivy, ever since even before I met those guys in Toronto, all my buddies, we played 10-20 on short bankrolls. But if one guy went broke, we just loaned him money. Right. It was just that simple.
On the topic of risk taking, I remember you wrote an article, I think it was either for Card Player Bluff, I think it was for Card Player maybe 4, 5, 6 months ago, talking about, and I think you gave an example of a guy that was grinding 5-10, and then he had a buddy that was a friend of his that would occasionally take shots in the 10-20.
I remember that, yeah.
You know what I mean? In a tougher 10-20 game. Then the guy would go broke, and then he'd borrow money, go back in the 5-10, and then take a shot in the 10-20. And you said basically the conclusion to that article in the end was that guy that's actually taking shots and being risky with his bankroll will actually inevitably become a better player and make more money in the long term.
Oh, I definitely think so. And this might, raise some eyebrows, but the higher you play, the better you're going to get at poker. You see a lot of really bad players like celebrities or whatnot. They jump right into the highest games in the world, right? Mm-hmm. And, people laugh like, oh, they're going to get crushed or whatever. But if they can afford it, they're going to get better at poker a lot quicker playing with the best than they would playing in the smaller games. So if they were to go back to those smaller games, they do much better. And to your example that you mentioned, let's say you had two players, right? Both relatively equally skilled. One guy decides, I'm playing 5-10 no limit hold'em. That's all I'm going to ever play, right? And he might even be a little bit better than the other guy. But the other guy is a little more of a risk taker. So now he takes shots at the 10-20, takes shots at the 20-40. He goes broke all the time. This other guy's making a steady income at the 5-10, right? Well, this other guy who's taking the shots is going to have a better opportunity of improving his overall level of skill, okay? Mm-hmm. If he sticks at one of the higher levels, he's going to make more money there. If he doesn't stick, the experience he's going to get against those higher players is going to improve his overall ability so much so that when he goes back to the 5-10 game, it's going to seem easy to him. It's akin to doing this. It's akin to playing pool where you got these big, wide pockets, right? Or no, you got these really, really tight pockets where you just, you can't make the ball unless you hit it exactly perfect. Practice on that for a week and then play on an 8-ball table where they're really big. It's going to seem much easier. Same holds true with poker. You play against the best, you play in the top, in the higher limit games, go down to the small games, you're like, oh my goodness, they're giving it away.
We had Durr on the show a couple weeks ago, and he talked about an example where he doesn't think that people are liberal enough with their bankroll where they have a big edge. For the example he gave was that, he hasn't necessarily gone broke, but he's lost 30 to 40% of his bankroll a lot of the time when, say, taking a 70% shot. Like he says that people don't take enough shots at, say, 200, 400 PLO that run on the internet when the game is really, really good because they don't want to lose 30 or 40% of their bankroll. What do you think?
Well, he's definitely right, and Sklansky and them are definitely wrong. I remember reading a long time ago the amount of bets that Sklansky said you should have in your bankroll before you decide to move up in limits, and it was beyond laughable. I forget the number, but it was like I calculated. I think it would take about 412 years to move up to the big game if you did it that way, right? Yeah. I'm a big proponent of the idea, and I think everyone who's ever played in the big game has done it with a similar approach, and that is to take a percentage of your bankroll and take a shot in a bigger game, but if you lose it, go back to your bread and butter. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if I was playing 20-40 limit, or say I was playing 10-20, I want to take a shot at 20-40. Well, let's say for 10-20, my comfortable bankroll is 2,500. Well, if I get my bankroll up to 4,000, I'll take a $1,500 shot in that 20-40 game. I might go broke and lose it, but I'm still going to have that 2,500 to go back to 10-20 with. Mm-hmm. That 1,500 extra, if I'm a better player and I have an edge, I might just stick there. And I'm going to save a lot of time. I know that I remember Sklansky used this formula to show that, you take these shots, you're usually going to go broke and it's just going to cost you time before getting there. But he's missing one key factor. It's so important. You're going to get better way faster. Mm-hmm. By moving up in limits, you become a better player. And that can't be quantified in any sort of a formula because it's going to make your win rate so much bigger, so much quicker.
So when you're taking more shots early on, you might be increasing your risk of ruin. I guess your case is that overall, long term, it's definitely of more value.
For some, here's the thing though. I mean, generally, poker players will raise will reach the level of their incompetence. And that's difficult because not everyone's going to be able to beat 2 and 400 pot limit Omaha or no limit Hold'em. Mm-hmm. And the thing is the struggle for some is to realize when that point comes and to not play that game and to just stick at the one level before and to know that that's where they belong. It's, there's ego related, there's a drive, there's confidence, there's everything associated with the idea that I want to try that next level. You don't think that you're outclassed. And that's probably the one reason I guess for the majority of people where this kind of approach could be dangerous because they may not be able to say, you know what? Hey, these guys are just better than me.
And they might just continue on
and then just continue to beat their head against the wall. All right, buddy. Be a good boy. We're almost done here. No, I'm just kidding.
One of the other things when I was reading in some of your blogs and your video blogs that I found interesting is that you were talking about religion. Now, I'm not religious. A lot of people out there, I think, nowadays aren't religious. But I thought it was interesting because it seems for you religion helps your mental state. So how important do you think it is to find something that helps you, whether it's concentrate or just helps your mental state in terms of your overall performance in poker?
Well, I would call it, rather than even mental state, is just a piece. Mm-hmm. if you're an unhappy person in life and you're not happy with how things are, it's going to be very difficult to play your best game because you're going to have a negative outlook. If you have a positive outlook, you're more likely to play better poker. And on the whole issue of, being a believer or not, I guess since you brought it up, the one thing that offends me more than anything is the idea that to be a Christian or to be a believer, that you can't be smart, you can't be intelligent, that you'd have to be, you have to be a math science person that to be intelligent and all. And then I look at like the best poker players in the world and think, okay, well, Chip Reese, rest his soul, was a Christian. Doyle Brunson's a Christian. Phil Ivey's a Christian. I'm a Christian. Jennifer Harmon's a Christian. I mean, we all just dumb, because we're like, it's just offensive. Like, I don't think atheists are dumb, or I think they obviously, they're not believers. They don't have that. They didn't take that leap of faith. And I definitely think there is one. I don't think any atheist is ever going to win. Well, it's impossible to win the debate to say that, like, we can prove there is no God. Good luck. Just as I can't say I can prove there is one. So it's really kind of a futile debate. And I definitely think, especially with a lot of the online poker discussions that go on, there needs to be a lot more respect going both ways, because I feel like on both accounts, I think sometimes Christians are really mean and rude to the atheists, but then on the other times, a lot of the atheists are very condescending and mocking of other people's beliefs, and not just Christian, but whether it's Buddhism, or what other ones you got there.
But just just the fact of I guess overall better mental being or just happiness. So you're saying that you've definitely found that when you have a more positive outlook in life, that it's helped you on the.
Well, there's this whole thing which I thought was funny, The Secret, which is out there, right? And I'm like, what the? My friend's like, you got to check this out. And this is a video, and I'm just like, for the first 10 minutes, I'm like, all right. Duh. Like, okay, if you think good thoughts, you're more likely to have a happy day. If like surround yourself with good people and you'll be happier. I'm like, envision good. I'm like, duh. I mean, what is this brain dead obvious? But I guess for some people it isn't, But I genuinely believe so much so that your poker game is directly affected to where your life state is. It's difficult for anyone if they're having trouble at home with the wife, or if they're, having trouble with their children, to just really think clearly at the table. If you're running bad, even forget about like other things. If just, your money's getting short and things are going bad and, it doesn't seem like it's going to turn, that, whatever you want to say about it, very few people can play through that without having any effect. Well, actually, no one can play through that without having a negative effect on your skill level.
I got a poker business question for you, because I think you're one of the most qualified people, obviously, to answer this. Because, again, you've been around since before the poker boom and during the poker boom. It seems like right now there's a question of the future of where the WPT is going to hold. They don't necessarily have a new contract with the GSN. How do you think that poker will be affected if there are no longer, say, a large $10,000 a month tournament every single month?
Well, you know what? The thing is, there will be regardless. There already is. Like the EPT, and I think this is one of the key reasons why the WPT has maybe lost some of its mojo, because the EPT is caught on super fast. It's really grown exponentially, and the truth is, a lot of the Europeans and they don't have to come here anymore. They've got their own tournament once a month themselves. They've really kind of taken a page out of WPT's book and made it real international tour. So people are still going to find places to play, and if let's say, for example, the worst case scenario, the WPT didn't run, you're still going to have 10K buy-ins at places, and they'll find different ways to televise it. Maybe it'll be a one-off type thing, maybe it'll be a different kind of a tour, but I just don't see how, with the amount of money that's in poker right now, you're not going to see bigger buy-ins. If you look at Poker Stars, for example, coming up at with their W Coop, they're having some sick big tournaments, like 10K buy-in, 25K buy-in. There's still a lot of money in poker, and and there's already an oversaturation of tournaments with all the WPTs and all the EPTs, and they overlap, and then you've got all these other special things in between. So
let's talk a little bit about that online poker and the lack of what was, I guess you can say, a big game this summer. It was kind of a little bit of a discussion that they didn't necessarily, especially in the first few weeks, nothing was really running over in Bobby's room, and it just kind of seemed like, well, the guys, if they want to play big, they're just going to play online. So we have that question, and now we have the scandalous question, where, as a guy that might play fairly big online, what do you think about like this whole UB thing, and what do you think about there's always some sort of possibility that something fishy can be going on at the upper levels?
Well, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to anyway. I know this is going to get me a lot of trouble, but I'll be honest with you. The fact that it happened was a little shocking, obviously, but the fact that it was going to be them didn't surprise me that much because I was never comfortable with a lot of the people in upper management anyway. Mm-hmm. And I always felt uneasy about some of the decisions they made, whether it was the first, UB sponsored WBT event where they held that little sort of fake tournament where they said we're playing for such and such, which they didn't, and then maybe later did. But, just the way in which they conducted business, that just didn't surprise me so much. Having said that, it seems to me that to some degree it's helped online poker in a weird way, that it's heightened the importance of security and security software, and the bigger sites, the ones that are established, huge, they have so much to risk. There's so much to risk to allow anything like that, any ownership to do something stupid like that they're already making so much money anyway that I feel like it's a lot more safe. And if it tells people anything, it's just that you should be really careful about playing any fringe sites. Go with what's biggest, go with what's best.
Maybe that has the history of the best security, right?
Absolutely.
Going on again, no real super big games going on this summer. Do you think that the players that play the big game are just kind of naturally moving over to online just because of convenience?
No choice. It's just as simple as this. I knew this when I was a teenager. I'll give you an example. We had this really nice room we played in called Check and Raise. It was a private club. And, it was real good, happening and whatnot. And all of a sudden, this guy Moshe opened up a club probably like 2 miles down the road. It was awful. It was a complete dump, smoke-filled, dirty. There was no food. It was awful. But Moshe played there, okay? And Moshe's friends played there. All of a sudden, Check and Raise, this beautiful club, was empty, and Moshe's club was full. And it just came down to action. Poker players are going to go where there's money. And right now, you got a lot of these guys, some of the other online players, the No Limit guys, they play horse now. So what do you think the big game players are going to do? They're going to go and grab that money, until the learning curve gets them to where they're a level where they can actually win, Like when they see Durr in a horse game, they lick their chops,
well,
you know what I'm saying?
I wasn't going to be specific, but I had, I'm forced to follow up. These guys that have been really successful in No Limit, Hold'em, Six Max, shorthanded, and PLO, like a guy like Durr, and some of the other big names, how have they been doing in horse in terms of what you've seen? And do you think that they'll actually pick up the game because poker is poker?
Okay, you know what I think? I think they'll get even better at it than they have at No Limit Hold'em and stuff like that. I think they'll be able to get close to mastering horse-like games because, again, it is a little bit more mathematical. There are certain situations in 8 or better games where there's clearly a right play and a wrong play, and I think that the more they play, the better they'll get at it. Having said that, right now they suck. They suck bad. I played with Durr, and I like the guy, trust me. Yeah. But man, his brain works really weird in horse. So I was just watching some hands just going. He was asking me questions like, why does everyone fold? I'm like, oh, never mind.
Oh, because it's yeah.
Well, he just in every stud game he just feels like he's getting the right price to play.
Right.
So he stretches the envelope a little too far with his starting hand selection and stuff. But he'll figure it out. I have no doubt that they'll get better at it. But there's a learning curve there. And then right now, clearly, in games like that, the best are those that have been playing it the longest, and that's where guys like Doyle, and Jennifer and Ivy and them will just crush.
Now, I think I read or heard you say somewhere that Stud 8 or Better is one of your favorite games, if not your favorite game. Is that still the case now?
Absolutely. I think Stud 8. I think I read cards better in Stud 8 or Better than I do in Hold'em by a long shot. I can, I don't do it. You don't see me on TV reading Stud 8 or hands going, you got 4 or 5 hearts in the hole, don't you? But I feel like there's even more information available in Stud 8 or Better for me to be able to play my opponent's hand. And that's what I like doing Hold'em anyway. And in Stud 8 or Better, there are some unique ways you can do that if you have a real good, solid knowledge base of how your opponent thinks.
Well, we had Michael DiMichele on, who finished second in horse last
He made a goofy play against me, but go ahead.
Yeah. And we went through Stud, and then Paul Darden's going to be on in a couple weeks, and we went through Stud 8 or Better. And one of the interesting questions I had to them was the play of high hands in Stud 8 or Better. And, of course, the answer depends upon your opponent. But do you think that people get lost a little bit? I find I get a little lost when I'm playing a high split pair, when it's obvious that, I've got a queen up and, now I'm against a 3 or a 5. Well, Jesus, when the hell do I get out now when they catch on 4,
Well, the decision to even play a hand like queens or jacks should be based on a couple things. One, the ante. If it's a low ante game, you don't even need to play those kind of hands. 2, the type of game you're in. If you're in a really like low limit loose game, those hands don't have much value. 2 jacks don't do very well against 4 or 5 people. The only time that you should be playing those hands is in a little bit of a tighter game with a higher ante, like for example, like a 1 in 2,000 game. If you got a queen up, there's a 3 and a 5 behind you, and you got split queens, of course you're going to raise it up. How you play past that is where people make a lot of mistakes in Stud 8 or better with those hands. For example, on 4th Street, if you have queens and the guy with the bring-in caught a 3, and you still have your queens, you catch a 10 and he catches a 5, that's a pretty bad card. You don't fold because he's not there yet, but you don't want to bet it either. That's a spot where you check call, and I see a lot of people continue to bet because they have the queens. They get raised, put 2 bets in when they should only put in 1. On 5th Street, of course, if the guy bricks, then you would take the lead again. But you don't really want to fold the big hand unless your opponent's board gets really coordinated and straighty and acey. If the guy starts with 3-5 and then he catches an ace, that's a good time to go home. If the guy has 3-5 and he catches a 4 and he's got 2 of a suit, you don't see any deuces or 6s out, and you've got queens that aren't that good, that might be an okay time when the pot's still small. But once you've called past 5th Street, it's very difficult to make a case for folding on 6. And that was a shocking thing in the 50K horse. I saw so many people fold on 6th Street when all I had was a low, and I had a draw, and they'd had I knew they called me on 5 with kings. My board was 3-4-6, and then I'd catch an 8. And then they folded. I was like, what the? Wow.
Well, one of the things I always learned when playing Stud 8 or better was that critical street was 5, where if you start with a high hand, then you don't make 2 pair, and now the guy has 2 open cards to a low that are connecting. Like, say he catches a brick on 4, and now he catches a 3. He had a 5 up, and now he catches a 3. And now you still have just bare jacks. How do you figure out if you continue on after that big bet street?
On 5th Street, you're a favorite. That's that just the simple math stuff. That's the stuff I used to have fun with, just simulating hands and stuff. Where there's small edges in Stud 8 better, and you got to know sometimes. Okay, if you have a pair and a 4-card low versus a bigger pair, are you a favorite? All these little types of things. And if you have jacks and your opponent's board is 3-5 jack, 3-5 10, you're absolutely going to be a favorite there, unless he has a monster. If he's got 4-6 of spades, a 4 flush, and a 4 straight, or maybe something along those lines. But it's the hand on 5th Street is usually not that hard to play because you're going to play off your opponent's board.
Right.
If he catches bad, you're betting. If he catches good, you're checking.
Right.
That's pretty much standard.
Well, and the other thing too was that you read about Stud High where the fundamental error is if you see a guy call on 5, he's usually supposed to call on 6 regardless, right? In Stud High.
Oh yeah, for the most part. Unless the board
in Stud 8 or better, is it?
It's almost the same. I mean, unless if you're making the call on 5 in Stud 8 or better. It's usually correct to go through with the hand all the way to the river. And again, there's exceptions if a guy catches a ridiculously good card. If his board is 3-4-5 and then he catches a 6 of diamonds. But then again, it probably would have been better to fold on 5 anyway when he had 3-4-5. Right. So most of those cards that are going to come off on 6 that are going to scare you off the hand are cards that you should have folded on. But how about this? If you decide the guy's board is 4-7, he catches an ace, and you've got kings. Obviously, if he catches aces on 6, that might be a good time to fold.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of other things I want to get to before we wrap it up, and we're going to end it because I'm going to ask you about PLO and where you think that game is going. But I just want to kind of zoom through draw because you wrote an article about us, obviously in Super System 2 about Deuce to 7, and the popularity now of Badugi and Deuce to 7 in these rotation games in LA. Again, I talked with Michael about it last week. Where do you see the biggest mistake that people make in draw games? I understand that it's a very technical, math-based game. Do you think there's just too much gambling going on?
Yeah, it's an easy game to go off in. I mean, it's an easy game to get stubborn in. When you get stuck, you can get stuck hard. The variance in that game is really high. Mm-hmm. And what's great about adding a game like that to the mix is, let's say you're playing a regular horse game, but you throw a triple draw and Badugi in there. That's a game that'll get people. There's not much edge. Mm-hmm. But the point of even playing it is that it gets people to gamble more in the other games too, because you lose this huge pot in triple draw, and now you're playing a limit stud hand. You just want to gamble, and It gets people on tilt, really. And the biggest mistake people make in the draw games is they just play too many hands. Because it seems there's so many draws, you can't be that far behind. Once you get stuck in a pot, you can keep drawing. Now you're getting the right price, but you're usually so far behind if you're playing badly, right off the bat.
I mean, drawing 3 and a Deuce to 7. I mean, can you draw 3 if there's multi-way action? You're in the big blind and you have a Deuce and a 7 in your hand?
Oh, you should.
You should,
of course. Then in a situation like that, you're getting a ridiculous price. And in the big blind, I would say that almost regardless of the situation. If you're in the big blind and you have a deuce 7, as long as it's only one more bet to you, it's, well, I can say unequivocally it's correct to call.
Correct to call and play out.
Regardless of the number of players.
I haven't seen anything really written about Badugi, and it's kind of something that there's more variables in it, and it's a game that hasn't really been solved. And again, just last week I learned, D. McKelly said, well, I said, what do you usually play from up front? He says, usually I'll come in with a raise to a 3-card 6 from the first few positions, which I never really even heard someone actually specify their range that way. Because I see these guys play 3-card 10s and 3-card jacks from front, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't know the math, but that's got to be wrong.
It's awful. I mean, the reason those games are so juicy is because people like you said, there is no real literature on it.
Uh-huh.
So people are kind of guessing as to what the right plays are and what the wrong plays are. And you could do yourself a big favor by playing that game like super nitty, super tight. If you do that, right, nobody cares. Like, no one's going to notice the fact that you've played one hand in 5 rounds. If you raise and they have a hand they want to play, they'll play it regardless. That's same in triple draw as well. Like, you could play super tight and then you raise in the one hole with deuce 3, 4, 7, and you got a guy calling with like deuce 5, 6. Because he's going to call. He's got a hand he's going to play. So they don't really care that much if you're playing tight. And it's the one game where you really, you can win, but you don't even have to bluff, really. You're just playing fundamentally sound, always being in the lead, always drawing smoother, and playing like premium hands. And the key reason you're able to do that in a lot of those looser games is because, they're 9 or 10 handed often, and you're really not going to get blinded off. You're not,
right.
Because every time you play a hand, there'll be action. There'll be somebody in the pot with you.
One last question about draws. Again, sometimes I struggle is like, say after the second draw of deuce or after the second draw of Badugi, where you are drawing pretty much to perfect. In Badugi, you got 1, 2, 3, and you're drawing perfect, and you throw a bet in after the second draw, and now you get check raised, and you draw 1, and you don't improve, and now the guy bets after the third draw. Now that these games are spread online and at the mid-levels, how often do you think that that's a bluff at the mid-levels, and how often is that play used at the higher levels as a bluff?
It's very rarely a bluff, period.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, because the thing about those games is people just assume that they're going to be called anyway, because the pots are so large that bluffing isn't necessarily all that profitable a strategy. I mean, the play might work once in a while where a guy will try that, but here's the thing. If a guy drew, right, he's got a hand. He drew once, he drew twice. He's got to have something. So is he really going to give up on drawing to what he's drawing to make a check raise bluff so that in the hopes that you break or you don't have it so that he can bet the river and steal it? It's such a long shot parlay. It could be a move, and there are certain players that you got to pay attention to that will do that more often than others. But there are other players that you can bet your last dollar that it's never a bluff in that spot.
So again, yeah, that was nice that we shot down draw. One last thing before we wrap it up, and I got to bring up PLO because it just seems like PLO is just got so crazy popular online. As a matter of fact, at the Rio, I don't know if you noticed in the cash games, there was very, very little no-limit action. All the big games were all PLO. Durr and Brian Townsend both say that PLO is a better game than No Limit. What do you think about PLO?
Depends on the definition of better. And what is better? Better in that there are more bad players, there's more action, your earn is probably bigger if you're playing with weaker players because No Limit Hold'em is a game that's been, you can't say solved, of course, but it's a game where people have a pretty good understanding of what to play before the flop. That's not the case in Pot Limit Omaha. How to bet their hands out in Pot Limit Omaha, when to bluff. There are some more intricate situations, and the one thing that makes it better too, again, is just the action factor because it's a much easier game to go off on. And that's one of the things I look at for what is good for a poker game is like, do we have anything in there that's going to make people just go off like a rocket? And PLO, deuce to 7, triple draw, Badugi, throw them in a mix of horse, and the horse game is going to be even better than you've ever seen before.
Well, Durr said that one of the biggest mistakes that he saw the no-limit player make as they're transitioning over to PLO is just not understanding hand values. In your experience with PLO, how does say like a seasoned no-limit player start to understand these new hand values?
The thing is, to tell you the truth, and obviously I'll be doing this with Poker VT eventually, but the whole PLO is a game that is really well suited to hold the small ball approach, really, because it's in Hold'em, for example, you're looking to crack aces. Obviously, that's a tall task in Hold'em, but it's much easier to do in PLO. And if you've got players in PLO that are going to play those aces like they're a big hand when it comes 4, 6, 7, you're in a juicy game. So, the similar approach is really effective in that, in No Limit Hold'em, you're playing a lot of little pots trying to win a big one. In PLO, you're going to play a lot of pots hoping to flop big and flop a guy dead when he's drawn real slim, you know? But you don't really risk a lot in the meantime. Like, you know, having aces is just not that big a deal. I mean, it is if you can get it all in before the flop or if you're playing short stack PLO. But if you have ace before the flop and you raise under the gun, and you have ace 9-4, and you get 3 callers, you're like almost, I would almost say that in deep stack poker, you're like a money dog long run, unless they're both suited. You know? Because you raise with ace 9-4, and then it comes 6, 7, 10. It comes queen jack 8. It comes king jack 7. It comes deuce 3, 8. How many good flops are there for ace 9-4? Not that many. And if you got 3 players behind you, you know, you're basically going to have to play most of those hands just check fold. So really, there's really not a lot of sense in even raising with a hand like that under the gun. It's almost better to just limp, hope that some guy with kings raises, a couple call, and then you can shove it in before the flop.
Have you gotten a chance to watch any PLO training videos on other sites by any chance?
No.
Because I wonder sometimes, and maybe I just wonder myself, well, maybe I don't know the game well enough, but their hand values that they show, like even in a 6-max game, I think, like in No Limits, well, they'll show ace, king, 5-4 with a suited ace, and they raise with that hand. And I'm trying to figure out the best way to figure out what the best hand is in PLO
well,
pre-flop.
You know, you shouldn't worry so much about the pre-flop decisions. Like, I learned how to play the game from Phil Ivey, and he plays every single hand, like, period. And so do I. When I play PLO, I play a lot of pots because the whole key to that game, the whole key to being successful is the decisions you make after the flop. It's about not getting all of your money in bad after the flop. Virtually any 4 cards can't be that bad. If you have, you know, queen, jack, 8, 6 in your hand with 1 suit, that's not that bad. It's not a bad hand. You can play it. You don't have to play it. But once you become more comfortable playing PLO, you can play all kinds of hands, especially when you're in position. When you're in position, you can pick up so many flops when everyone misses. And the truth is, in PLO, it's actually different than No Limit Hold'em. You'd think that in No Limit Hold'em, it's easier to steal multi-way pots on the flop. But it's kind of easier in PLO. Because in PLO, everyone expects someone to have a big hand. So if you bet the flop, and it comes queen 6-4, and a guy has a queen, he's not going to ever call you there.
Right. He
like almost ever.
Needs a minimum of top 2 to call.
You're gonna have to have. People need a really big hand to continue in PLO. So if you're playing in a tight PLO game and you know you're in a situation where everyone's waiting on the nuts, you can bet like half the pot almost every time, and they're just going to fold unless they have the nuts. And when they do, you just fold. Big deal. You know, it's a profitable play in the long run. And of course, you might have the nuts too every once in a while, which helps.
And again, you know, to wrap the PLO conversation up, for a new player, what do you think the biggest mistake they make? Well, the guy says, "Oh, I flopped the set," or "I flopped top 2." Are you looking for your redraw hands as well? Is that what people?
The biggest mistake they make is trying to protect what they think is like the best hand, which is often not even the best hand. Like, for example, they flop top 2 on a coordinated board with 2 flush cards. They could easily be a huge underdog with that hand. If it comes like the hand I went broke with in the 10K PLO, a guy had Jack 10 9 3. The flop came Jack 9 4 with 2 spades. He check raised me with Jack 9 10 3 there. That's just, he's got jacks and 9s.
Right.
That's a really kind of a nutty play because, well, my hand was Queen 10 8 7. Oh, sorry, it was even better than that. It was Jack 9 5. So I had 7 8 Queen 10. I need a 6, had a complete wrap and a straight flush draw.
Right.
He check raised me in this spot. Such an awful play, really, because I'm not folding if I bet that flop, most likely. And what is he going to do when anything from a 6 7 8 10, you know, queen, king, spade, any one of these cards come off, he's just going to guess, hope I don't have it. You know, that's one of the biggest mistakes people make in PLO, I think, beginner players, is they check raise in those spots where they're going to get called and then have to make a really big decision. I got to tell you, since you're talking about PLO, there was a really interesting hand where Phil Galfond played brilliantly against me. And it was a hand where I was chip leader with 10 left in the 5K rebuy. And he raised late, and it was 10-handed now, so I was tightening up my starting hand requirements, but I got a real beauty. I had 8, 9, 10 jack. You know, with 1 suit. So I called, of course, and it came King Jack 8 with 2 diamonds. I don't love it. It's not great because I've got bottom 2 and I have a straight draw, but there's the flush draw there, and I've got the bottom one. But he bets a flop, and I, of course, call. You know, I'm not going to fold. And then the turn card is like a total blank. It's a 3. And he checks. So I look at his stack. He's got about 500. I got chips. So I bet the pot like 150. I figured now he probably wouldn't check if he had me beat. He probably has a draw, and, you know, I'm just going to push him off at bet the pot. He check raises me the pot. And now I'm like, oh, no. I'm so dead. You check 3 kings?
Yeah.
So anyway, make a long story short, I make the call. He's got the death hand for me. He's got king, king, queen, 7. So I need a queen or a 7. He's got those covered too.
Yeah.
But what was interesting is what he said after the hand. because I thought, I said to him, I said, you tricked me there with the check. And he said, and this is a really important lesson for anyone who plays PLO, he said the reason he checked was because he didn't want the pot to get any bigger because he's out of position, right? So if he checks and I bet, of course he's going to go all in with the nuts.
Right.
But if he checks, he expected me to check. But he's protecting himself because if the river card comes an ace, queen, 10, 9, 7, or a diamond, he's going to have a much bigger pot and a much tougher decision to make with 3 kings if he doesn't fill up. So he was protecting himself. Even though he had the nuts on the flop and the turn, he was protecting himself from losing a really big pot because he's both out of position and it's a scary board. And that was just, I heard that and said, yeah, it was brilliant. It's just very smart. He's a smart player.
Well, it's interesting what we're talking about, though. When we talked about no limit, don't protect your hand. In PLO, though, how are you sometimes not forced to protect your hand? Like, you got bottom 2 on that board. I would think in my head,
it's more important.
Behind.
It's so much more important, too, sometimes in PLO to, protect against bluff cards or protect against putting yourself in a really bad spot where you're dead, where you make your hand obvious and then the other player has the potential with position to just call you, and then on the river any one of these cards come off and you check, and now you're just going to have to face a big bet a high percentage of the time against good players, and you're just going to guess. You're just going to have to guess, make a random guess, and most of the times you'll fold it. So that's, protecting your hand. It's more like protecting yourself from just getting robbed.
So it's almost like you are going to bet with a 2-pair hand more so on the turn, just because if you check, the nuts are going to change every single time, on the river.
For me, I bet because I had position, and I felt like he wouldn't check 3 kings twice. I felt like he would want to protect it on the turn because he was relatively short in chips. And plus I was chip leader. So the hand wasn't going to bust me. It obviously took a big dent out of me. But when he checks the turn, it looks like my jack. And plus, there's a slim chance, too, I felt that if he did have some kind of goofy kings up, like kings and 3s, he might give it up.
Yeah.
On the
like
turn.
A top and bottom.
Yeah, I might be able to bluff him.
Right.
If he has one of those hands.
And the interesting thing, too, that you brought up, too, again, as we wrap this up, with that Jack 10, 9, 3 hand, with that kid who's got the dangler, he's got the 3. How much more powerful is his hand if he's got Queen Jack 10, 9 on that board of Jack 9 or Jack 10, 9, 8? Right?
Yeah, on that board. Now you're waiting for the nitty hands. I call them the nitty hands, those guys that always have 10 Jack Queen King double suited, Ace King Queen with a suit. Give me a break. You got. That's not like a hand I would not play. I'd play it sometimes. This guy was actually in the blind. So, again, it's not about the hand that he played. It's not about the value of it. It's about the value of his hand after the flop and the way in which he decided to play it. He decided to play a big pot with 2 measly pair, with 2 flush cards out there and a very coordinated board in a spot where, at best, he's a check and call. That's the best play. He should check and call. If a deuce comes on the turn, now he can take the play away by betting the pot.
Right. Well, Daniel, I appreciate you letting me come over to your house, and of course, Poker VT. You also have a new book out, right?
Yeah, it's a big one too.
Power Hold'em, is
that right?
Yeah,
it's 500 pages.
Is it really?
Yeah,
wow.
it was. I wrote about the back half of it, and it's basically small ball. People talk about it all the time, but no one really has ever written anything about how you do it, how you defend against it, and why it works. So there's that, and of course, Todd Brunson wrote a chapter on cash game poker. Evelyn Ng, who's still in the main event, good luck, Evelyn. Basically wrote about what I taught her for a beginning player, and I think that's really appropriate for beginners. Just sort of a big bet style, which is the exact opposite. You could read her section and mine and say, wow, that's exactly the opposite advice, but it makes sense. For a bad player, new players, you want to keep the pots big. You want to force people out. Better the player you are, the more you want to have more decisions on the turn.
So you can go to Amazon.com and pick that up.
Yeah, or you can if you go to Full Contact Poker, there's a link there or anywhere. It's not hard to find.
Well,
and it's big, real big and fat.
Again, thanks for coming on the show, and we'll look forward to you and Poker VT. All the stuff that you do.
All right, man, it was fun. I feel like I learned something for myself.
All right, so that's going to do it. We will see you next week right here on Cash Play.